Atul, thank you so much for jumping on.
Oh, thanks, Phil. Excited.
So I'm Phil. I'm a partner at Webusoft. We build custom software, and today we're talking pharma. Atul, do you want to take a couple minutes, explain who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I'm a physician scientist. And I do early stage product development on the pharma side, primarily biotech. So I did my medical training in India, then a PhD postdoc at Johns Hopkins. And from there, I jumped ship and I was a management consultant at McKinsey for 7 years. Then I ran a biotech company and we took our drug through phase three, sold that. Then I ran US operations for India's largest life sciences company. And for the last 15 years almost, I've been helping lead Fanon, which is one of the most active early stage product development groups in the life sciences area.
So what specifically does Fanon do?
So really, Fanon, it gets back to your the question you asked earlier, right? Fanon is really focused on trying to address what we see as a major bottleneck in pharma, right? The real bottleneck in biotech isn't in discovery. We have more good biology than we know what to do with. And then once you have a clinical stage asset, especially if you have early proof of concept, then you can actually work through. It's expensive, but the process is relatively straightforward. The real choke point, which people don't fully appreciate, is actually getting an asset out from early research and through all of the IND enabling work into clinic. And outside Boston and the Bay Area, the vast majority of programs die on the vine. And a couple of reasons. One is the statistical failure rate is brutally high, and the product development experience just isn't there. And because you need teams who understand how to do product development, which is a completely orthogonal skill set to teaching or research. And so we really attempted and set up this model in Houston with Fanon that we believe is actually doing a good job of addressing that bottleneck.
And why Houston specifically?
Well, that's where we live, right? So the thing is,
Okay,
uh,
simple answer.
yeah, we've been in Houston over 30 years. My wife was an oncologist at MD Anderson, so we've been here, and I love Houston, home to the world's largest medical center. And the question always was, why do we have so much innovation, so much, expertise, so much clinical care, but virtually no product development? And so we thought we had a solution to do that, and it's working out. We'd like to think it's working out well.
Is it easier to do that, you think, in the state of Texas, just regulations wise?
No, no, I think not really, right? This is more a function of where we were and being able to access the resources. It is actually improved. So, one of the things that has happened in Texas in the last 15 years is we have what's called the Cancer Prevention and Research Institute of Texas, CPRIT. And that's 3 billion actually been renewed. So almost a $6 billion investment by the state of Texas in cancer research and product development. And actually, just last month, we approved the equivalent for dementia. So it's now going to be called DPRIT, which is the Dementia Research Prevention Research Institute of Texas. And so that's a large amount of money that's being funded, not just on research, but also on product development and prevention. So in that sense, Texas has attracted a lot of biotech companies because if for the product development you can get up to $20 million in grant funding, which can
That helps.
really
Yeah.
helps. But other than that, I think it was more a function of, we're here in Texas, we're in Houston,
Hmm.
lots of capacity, and what can we do to try to say we need to bring more assets through? Because at the end of the day, research is great. It's amazing. The whole knowledge creation, knowledge discovery is really important. You really can't have drugs without that. But where you really make an impact is when you take that and create a drug or a device out of that or a diagnostic out of that that actually helps people. And that's really where the big gap is, right? Is taking the really amazing amount of research that's happening across the country, across the world, and actually getting it to the point where you can evaluate it in patients. And that's where virtually 99.9% of innovation dies. That's where we are
Mm.
focused.
So what would be the number one factor to improve that, in your opinion, in the future?
So I think we have a model that we think works, and we would love to see it replicated over time. And it's really got two, three elements, right? I think the first element is that we have a pooled management team that brings experience in at the early stages. because at the very early stages of the development, you have to take the science and you have to repeat it, and it's really very lumpy. And so, with the pooled management team, we can work across multiple programs. The second thing is that the failure rate is extraordinarily high, right? When something comes from an academic institution, especially.
Why
Uh,
do you think that is, by the way? Because you said that earlier.
well,
Why is it so high?
I think multiple reasons. I think first of all, unfortunately, it's been shown. I think Bayer, Amgen, others have published data showing that even top tier academic research, uh, 70-80% of it tends to be non-reproducible for a variety of reasons. It's not necessarily fraud or anything like that, but for a variety of reasons that sometimes it's get non-reproducible, and some of that is just because the primary product of an academic researcher is publications, right?
Mm,
So they don't necessarily need the kind of rigor that is needed to say a product needs to be advanced. Number one, and number two, it's the cost. The cost of going from the preclinical early research to being able to test it in humans is extremely high. It can cost 7, 8, 10, $12 million to take a program in from there. So if you look at software, it's relatively straightforward, right? You take code, you spend 6 months writing it, you can actually have a minimal viable product, you go test
we
it.
can test it on humans very fast.
Yeah.
Yes.
Here, you basically need many years and sometimes double-digit millions of dollars to even do your what I would call a minimally viable product that you can test in humans. And
Right.
human biology is fundamentally different from animal biology, and we've had centuries or millennia of evolution, which is basically focused on making sure that our body is robust to things that you try to change, and so it's really hard. And so I think those are the reasons why the failure rate is so extraordinarily high. And so, but if you can get more of those interesting breakthroughs, clinical stage, preclinical breakthroughs into patient testing, then we have a much bigger, it's just a lot more shots on goal. I can
Right.
just give you a couple of numbers to hard ground numbers to ground it if you'd like.
Hmm.
So, since inception, we've been around, like I said, now getting on 15 years. We've brought in maybe 40 programs, and then which we kind of have tried to de-risk. We have about a dozen that are active right now, and 4 are in clinic. And I don't know if you know this industry very well, but getting to a clinical stage asset is actually an important milestone. And so, of the programs we brought in, we've already got 4 that have reached clinic, and about a dozen that are active in different stages. We've raised about $290 million overall. But of that, more than $80 million is non dilutive grant money. And
Mm.
that grant money becomes really important early on when your failure rate is really high, because we do the de-risking before we take in any outside investor money. And the idea is that by the time we basically get our hands dirty and we actually do the work to replicate it, make sure it works before we actually take in outside money. And we've only taken in outside money on 4 of our programs. So it's an extremely capital efficient approach. The flip side is it's not a speed to market play, but in an area where your failure rate is so high, and effectively, if you have something successful, the return is so high. We believe that being capital efficient, basically being able to buy a whole bunch of low cost options, because that's really
Yeah.
what biotech is about, right? You're hoping to get a lottery ticket, most of which are not going to pan out, but the few that do are huge returns. So the more capital efficiently you can do that process, and the more shots on goal you have, the better off you are.
Does speed to market matter in your industry? Is it like the most important thing or no?
It's actually one of the less important things in our industry, unless you're in
That's
a
what I
really
figured.
right.
Yeah.
So if you're right now, you're trying to do a GLP-1 mimic, and trying to go after obesity, then you need to speed to market matters, right? Or things where lots of people are working, speed to market matters.
Because there's already solutions out there,
Already
essentially.
solutions out there, and
Yeah.
big pharma people or companies are putting hundreds of millions of dollars after that. We tend to focus on areas which are not necessarily the hottest today, and their
Hmm.
market matters less, mainly because we have a lot of the patent protection process in biotech gives you a
Right.
decade almost of
Mm.
protection, and so even if it takes an extra year or two to bring something to market, it actually doesn't matter that much from a commercial perspective. So
Hmm.
that's why we believe capital efficiency matters more than speed to market for the vast majority of biotech.
So I was looking at your website earlier, and obviously I'm not from the industry. I have, my brother-in-law is a neurosurgeon and, works on cancer research. So I know, recognize some of the words, obviously, but um, you seem to be working on, specifically like a pretty precise type of solution. Are you aware of, like, is there a lot of competition, for instance, for that, for whatever solution you're working on, or is it really kind of a super niche? You almost have all the market if you succeed.
Yeah, well, I think we're actually working across therapeutic modalities. So we have maybe a third of our programs are cancer, but we also have programs in immunology, cardiovascular,
Mm.
infectious diseases, respiratory, neurology. So we've got multiple programs across the board. Of our clinical stage companies, one is in cancer, one is in supportive care
Oh,
cancer.
okay, I might have been looking at one specifically.
You
I
may
think,
have been looking at
yeah,
Altrum specifically.
that's right. That's the one. Yeah.
So Altrum is one of our four clinical stage programs, and I wear and that one is specifically focused at cancers that express a target called CD127.
Hmm.
We are actually the only player playing in that space right now. Mainly,
Worldwide,
I'm sorry.
is it on a world stage or specifically in the US?
Well, anywhere, because I think the target that we're going after, which is called CD127, also called the IL-7 receptor, was not broadly recognized as a target. It was
Mm.
really our collaborators at the National Cancer Institute, specifically a gentleman called Scott Durham, been working on it for 20, 25 years, and we in-licensed the technology from him. And so it's actually been the data is very robust, and we have over $20 million in grant funding for that, in addition to the investor money we've raised. And so we now are in clinical testing, and we hope to have our first data showing whether or not it works in the upcoming, next year or in 2027. And so that's actually a space where there is really not a lot of competition, specifically against that target.
Hmm.
And
So,
one of the indications which are going after, which is T cell acute lymphoblastic leukemia, which is actually acute lymphoblastic leukemia is the most common childhood cancer. So for
yeah.
children who fail that, there really aren't a lot of options, especially in the subset of ALL called T cell ALL. So that's really one of the reasons we are, and I think end of the day, most of the people in this industry are really driven and motivated by the opportunity to make a difference in people's lives. And so I think we're really excited about this program because it does have the potential, holds out the potential of making a big impact.
Can you explain a little bit? Because my understanding of cancer treatment is that depending on where you are and your level of access, you might not know like the entirety of the programs available, right? And especially the newer drugs. How long does it take? Uh, you start working on a solution up until it's commercialized, and then how do you get it into a mainstream kind of status where it's recognized, maybe on the world stage?
So again, the average time it takes to go from saying, okay, this is a potential target and a promising a drug, and you develop an asset, all the way to getting it to clinic, or to approval is probably about 15 years, 15 somewhere between
Wow.
20
Okay.
years. So it's a long process. It really is. And then the way it works is that once you get a drug approved, in the U.S. by law, if a drug is approved by the FDA, FDA has to approve it based on whether it's safe and efficacious. By law in the US, if the FDA approves it, Medicare has to cover it. And so access is actually relatively straightforward for older people, which is the majority of the patients with cancer. For people under 65, obviously it has to be covered by private insurance, and you have to be
Hmm.
which can be a challenge in the US. In other
All
parts of
right.
the world, including UK, Canada, etc., the process of reimbursement is separate from the process of approval. And so, just because a drug is approved does not necessarily mean that there will be payment for it. And of course, each market, the drug has to be approved separately, and
Yeah.
it just sometimes just means that the U.S. and Europe tend to get the first approvals because they are the largest markets, while smaller countries don't have. But I think one of the things that does happen with the more rare cancers is once something is approved and it shows it works, the community really understands it, and so they actually drive adoption in many cases.
Right.
So at
Because
first,
there's no alternative, essentially. Yeah.
yes, exactly. So I think the bigger barrier, frankly, is cancers and not just cancers, diseases for people who are not Medicare age, who might not have insurance, private insurance.
Mm.
But I think the other half of your question, which I think is that in cancer especially, it's not just the approved drugs that are important. There are a lot of drugs that are in clinical testing. And so these are when you go through, phase one, phase two, phase three. Those are the three stages of clinical testing that ends in approval. And so, especially for patients with cancer who have failed available therapies, getting access to the clinical trials is actually quite important, and that can make a big
Yeah.
difference. And that becomes a little bit harder. That depends on where you are. If you're treated by community oncologists, they may not know what all trials are available. You may need to travel to a clinical site. Most of these clinical trials are done in large academic centers. And so the access to clinical trials is a little bit more complex, especially because there are so many of them. One of the big advances in cancer in the last 20, 30 years, and this is actually broader than cancer, but especially in cancer, is that we've had what we call multiomics, where you can actually characterize the disease by what we call genomics, transcriptomics, proteomics. So basically allow you to, because cancer is not one disease. Cancer is probably 1,000
Yeah.
or 10,000 diseases.
Hmm.
So with a better understanding of what specific type of cancer you have, you can then target the patient to receive a particular drug that is targeting his or her cancer.
Yeah.
And so being able to be in a place where you can understand really what cancer you have, and access to the most promising new drugs which are in clinical trials, that can be a little bit more challenging. And that's, I think, a lot more disparities, if you will, in terms of who has access.
Right. And so, again, my understanding, 10,000 feet view of cancer treatment is it, the initial treatments were more about like launching a nuclear bomb to kill one person and obviously causes some collateral damage. And the more research progresses, the more targeted the treatments are for the exact root cause, right? Um, can you describe a little bit from your POV what the future of those treatments might look like, and what innovation you're most excited about?
So I think you're exactly right. I think really where cancer started was basically poisons, right? You have chemotherapy that kills everything. And the idea was, because cancer cells grow faster than normal tissues, you basically preferentially kill cancer cells, but you also kill faster growing normal tissues. And that's why blood cells, which grow very rapidly, or the gut lining, which grow rapidly, those are the cells that are particularly damaged, right? That is what we had for, decades, if you will. But exactly to your point, we now have an increasing appreciation of ways in which cancer cells differ from normal cells, because obviously something's happening to make the cells cancerous. And so if
Hmm.
you can find out what that is and then target the key vulnerability of the cancer cells, then you have more of a chance to try to say, okay, we can just go after the cancer cells and reduce the impact on normal tissues. We have virtually nothing that's 100% unique to cancer cells and not there in normal tissues. So a lot of it is, art as well as science. We are trying to say, okay, what do you have that's more expressed in cancer tissues, less expressed in normal tissues, and in the normal tissues, expressed in the really critical ones. But to your question, where do we really think the opportunity and the revolution is? So, I threw out the word multiomics a minute ago, and I didn't explain what that was. But if you really look at the revolution that's taking place, like I said, primarily in cancer, but also in other ways, right? We started off with the Genome Project, where we sequenced the entire human genome, right? That took
Hmm.
billions of dollars, decades to do. Now it's routine. Now you can basically sequence an individual's entire genome in a matter of a week for $1,000, right? But then after the genome, the what is called the genome, the DNA that produces the genes that actually encode that. That's basically the blueprint for making proteins. And there's a three-step process. From the genes, you get what is called an RNA, which is almost like the intermediary. And then you have the
Hmm.
proteins. Proteins are the ones that are in the body, in the cells, on the surface of the cells, inside the cells. And those really are where the rubber hits the road, if you will. And so those three things are called the omics, right? So you have the genomics, which is the gene, transcriptomics, which is the RNA, and proteomics. And that whole process has increased exponentially in the last couple of decades. And so, I mean, you now have tens of thousands of potential targets. When I say a target, I mean something that is preferentially present on a cancer cell, for example. and not in a normal cell. So we now have thousands or tens of thousands coming out from this whole multi-omics revolution. But the process of making drugs is not scaled, right? And so that's really part of what we realize is that we really need to have a rapid, affordable, repeatable path to go from target. So the targets are like the proteins that you want that are unique on the cancer
Hmm.
cell, to actually making an asset or a drug. And so what we did about 5 6 years ago, we went out and we bought a company that makes what we call Raptomers. It's a platform company, and effectively it allows us to take a target and go from a target to a high affinity a drug in a matter of months. And so potentially we can go from a target to something in clinical human testing in 12 to 18 months, which is really unheard of with most other modalities, and also do it much more affordably, including all of the R&D enabling work. And so to us, that is one example of what is going to be potentially a real step change in the ability to develop targeted drugs. And the holy grail of it eventually is, again, you develop cancer, you get drugs. Eventually, unfortunately, the cancer cells are extraordinarily smart, and they figure out a way around that, and they kind of develop resistance. That's why cancer comes back. So today, there's really, if a cancer comes back, you then try something else, but there's no way to customize it to the emerging cancer because it takes too long to develop a new drug. So kind of the holy grail eventually is to say, okay, when the cancer comes back, we actually develop a follow-up targeted therapy to treat that cancer, and you keep doing that. And so you make cancer from
Right. So more of an ongoing kind of treatment. Yeah.
exactly. So we can make it a chronic disease rather than acute disease.
Mm.
That's where I think the long-term mission, the vision is, I think.
Could you also do like, I've read articles and rumors about vaccines potentially as well. So that would be that would fall under like preventive, essentially, actions.
Well, I think so really vaccines are both preventive and treatable and treatment. So
Mm.
when we think about vaccines, most vaccines today are infectious disease vaccines.
Yeah.
Those are all preventative. But in the cancer space, as well as some of the other areas, they're a little bit more treatment, because end of the day, one of the big revolutions in cancer treatment has been immunotherapy, where we mobilize the body's own immune cells. I mean, we probably develop, every one of us is probably developing cancer cells every day, but our immune system is basically recognizing them as foreign and killing them. And so
Yeah.
one of the big revolutions in cancer care has been the ability to uh, train the immune system to go after the cancers. And so the cancer vaccines are really focused on saying, can we actually get those unique targets that I mentioned before? And rather than making drugs against them, you basically educate the immune system to kill those cancers. So that's really where the cancer vaccines are. And it can be after surgery, in which case you're trying to prevent the cancer from coming back, or it
Yeah.
could be with established cancers as well.
Because when the cancer comes back after surgery, it's going to be that same type that you basically beat before, right?
Yeah, maybe not, right? I think it could be that when you did the surgery, some of the cancer cells were already in circulation and they may come back.
Mm.
It could also be that some of the cancer cells that you didn't see mutate and they change a little bit. And so, unfortunately, it's not always
Not
exactly.
not as simple as I thought it could
Yeah.
be. Yeah.
But you are right. I mean, I think post surgery, it's more likely that the ones that come back were the same ones you removed. And so when you remove it, you actually have a whole bunch of cancer that you can then use to generate vaccines with. And then
Yeah.
you inject the patient with vaccine, and hopefully, if you have some
If you
circulation.
see this guy, you need to kill him. I say, yeah,
Yeah.
got it. Um, how do you view the role of AI moving forward in cancer research or even in your own company?
Well, that's a great thing. And I think if you had asked me this question 6 months ago, I would have probably hemmed and hawed. But really, we've done a lot now. I think, and the way I think about AI is in a very practical way, not to replace scientists, but to collapse timelines. And
Sure.
so, one of the things that we do, and again, we use it in multiple ways, but the piece that I'm most excited about, right, is typically, when we talked about cancer, right, or any other disease, right, you identify a target, then you basically say, okay, what is the unmet medical need? You talk about what other drugs are there, you talk about what payloads can you use, you talk about what cell lines do you have, and it tends to be a linear process where you do one step at a time. One of the things that I really like about AI is we can actually do a lot of these complex things in parallel. I'll give you an example, if I may. So, one of the new modalities in cancer therapies is what are called PROTACs. So, PROTACs are a drug that you can deliver to the cancer cell, and they basically kill all the proteins that you're targeting. So right now, PROTACs are used, without targeting, and so I mentioned this Raptomer platform that we have. We are trying to use that to say, okay, can we just take the PROTACs and we deliver it specifically to the cancer cells? We have targeted PROTACs. But what we needed to do, right? We wanted to understand which cancers is there an unmet medical need, which ones are attractive degradation targets, which ones are actually can we go after a cell surface target, how can we do the chemistry to actually bind that target to our raptomers, where is the toxicity going to be, how much is it expressed in normal tissues versus cancer tissues, and then what is the expression pattern in cell lines that we have in house. Normally you do that one at a time, right? And you basically that'll take many months. By using AI in parallel, we can basically ask, and typically we'll run, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Perplexity all at once in parallel,
Uh-huh.
and we
The
see
same prompt, or do you have them
exact same
talk to
prompts,
each other?
exact
Okay.
same prompts. And then I like to look at see what, and even within ChatGPT, I'll typically do two independent chats because it really gives you completely different answers.
With
But
the same model?
yeah, with the same model, right? Because
Interesting.
every AI, every time you run an AI, it's basically doing it from scratch. So if you go to
Hmm.
a different
Okay.
chat within ChatGPT, it's actually independent, right? Same thing with Perplexity or Gemini. And then it's actually very interesting how they're all a little bit different, but they actually, especially in important areas, they actually converge.
Yeah.
And so the example I gave you, targeted PROTACs, with the help of all of this, we basically developed a design strategy in a matter of days, which we are now executing against. Right? Normally, that would have taken us many months and a lot of money and time. And so I think that's just one example whereby being able to do multiple AI systems in parallel, we can, because each one looks at biology and chemistry differently, and so we do it all in parallel. And that's one example where we think has had some of the biggest impact in terms of how our workflow.
Is there one problem that you see that you can't solve that you think AI could solve in the next 10 years?
10 years is a little bit challenging. I think the one area that AI has really come out, has been really powerful, is the whole analysis. As I mentioned, this whole omics revolution has been generating literally tens of thousands of targets. I mean, it's just the amount of data
Yeah.
available is just unbelievable. So I think AI has been especially powerful in terms of basically being able to look through the terapets
You
or the
use the data. Yeah.
huge amounts of data, right?
Yeah.
And start teasing out potential targets. So I think that's one area that is already being established, well established. A second area that I already see is, the traditional process of developing drugs really is, there are three, four classic drugs. There are small molecule drugs, right? That's things like your aspirin. And typically the way that worked is that you have a medicinal chemist who will basically design lots and lots of molecules, and then they try it out, and then eventually you get a drug that seems to work, and that process can take years. AI is now beginning to do that more efficiently. The nice thing about small molecules is once you design the molecule, then the scaling up is very easy because it's a chemical synthesis process. Another class of drugs are kind of antibodies, what are called biologics. Those are much easier to screen, but the scale up process is much more difficult. Those will take $5-6 million because you have to make it in cells. So
Mm.
our Raptomer platform that I mentioned, one of the reasons we like it is it's quick to screen and it's quick and easy to scale up. So it's kind of its best of both worlds. But I think where the AI is emerging is to actually merge the whole process of saying, okay, let's identify a target, let's see what kind of drug you can develop against a target, and let's design the target. That's really where we're going. I don't think AI is yet able to overcome the bottleneck of all of the, because before you can take it go from animals testing to human testing, you have to make sure that it's safe and well tolerated, and we do that with a whole bunch of testing, including animal testing, etc., etc. I don't think we're quite at the stage where AI is able to do those models well enough to short circuit that testing process, in part because that testing process is mandated by the FDA. So regulatory processes
Right.
always change more slowly. But I think I
And
can.
does that change every election cycle? Like
No, no,
those requirements? No, okay.
not really,
Thankfully.
because I think these are, because the number one mission of the FDA, especially when it starts clinical testing, is to make sure that a drug is safe. It doesn't hurt people. And
Right.
so I think I've not seen any indications that anybody is going to kind of relax that. There are differences on the back end when in terms of when you think about approving drugs, what drugs are approved, which drugs
Sure.
are recommended for use. Most recently we have the whole vaccine things being reevaluated. But at the
Uh-huh.
early stages where you want to make sure that you don't put a poison into patients, I don't see that moving very rapidly. Eventually, I think AI will make that process more efficient, but it's not there yet.
Yeah. So, final question for you. Um, what would you like to see happen with your company specifically in the next couple of years? Any key achievements that you're going after?
Yeah, well, I think three things I would say. I think one of our most advanced program, which is a medical device that's in pivotal testing. Pivotal testing is the final stage of testing before you go for FDA approval. So that's now in pivotal testing in heart failure, which is one of the largest indications, largest cause of death and hospitalization in the world, especially in the
Wow.
developed countries. So that's in the final stages of testing. It's a company called Procerion. We really hope that will have positive results next year, in which case we'd go for approval. That'll be a big deal. The second one is really Altrum, which is the one which I think you found me about, and
Yeah.
that's the one where our antibody is now in clinical testing. And over the next 12 to 18 months, we will have data that tells us whether it works in these children with cancer or not. That'll be really exciting. And the third thing is our whole Raptomer platform that I talked about. We have probably about 6 or 7 drugs that we've already developed, and we could potentially develop another dozen. So it would be nice if we are able to get some of our early Raptomer-based drugs into clinical testing in the next 12 to 18 months. So that's kind of, I think, next 12 to 18 months, there should be a lot of really, hopefully, a lot of exciting things happening at Fanon.
Some crucial milestones. Well, I hope they all happen. And thank you so much for the great conversation.
Great. Thanks, Phil. Take care.